Hey everyone, before we jump in, a quick note. This episode of Control and Scale was originally recorded on April 15th, 2025. So, since the global trade and tariff environment is evolving quickly, especially between the US and China, as you can imagine, the percentages and policy changes probably, we're going to assume, have shifted slightly since this recording. So, I think that's probably a bet that we can make. So, we'll do our best to flag anything that's changed as things go about with new recordings and new blog posts and information. But always reach out and consult us or whoever your logistics partner or trade advisors are for the latest updates. Hey, and welcome to our first episode and LinkedIn Live of Control and Scale. I'm Jennifer from ISBA, and we're thrilled to have you join us. This series is dedicated to helping fast-growing brands navigate the complexities around scaling operations, whether it be from sourcing to fulfillment to systems. And today we're diving into a very critical top of mind topic for everyone, which is navigating China sourcing. And then how can you proactively protect your business? A lot is changing in the global landscape. We have evolving tariffs, there's supply chain disruptions, there's something new basically every day. So we're excited to dive into it and talk a little bit more about some of the things that we've been seeing. And I'm joined by my colleague Margarita from ISBA, and then Joe, who's the general manager at Slotted. So I'll let them kick off and do some intros as well.
My name is Margarita Bello. As Jen said over here, I'm VP at ITSMA. There's a lot of things that are happening in the world for doing the strategy for clients for heavily manufacturing in China and assisting them to be transparent about the situation and doing a strategy to help them out to navigate this situation. So we're here to help them out to talk a little bit more about this.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you all for being here. Jen, Margarita, thanks for having me join you guys for the inaugural live episode and recording.
Anytime we get to talk to you more is a good time.
I agree.
Yeah, no matter how stressful the topics may be, it's always fun to talk about them and see what's going on and help people solve some problems. So, like you mentioned at the top, I'm the general manager of Slotted, where we help brands and fulfillment providers streamline their RFP process, ensuring that they're finding the right partners for each other for where they are in their business cycle and what it is that they prioritize. And so where we may not have a direct impact on how tariffs are happening right now, we're an important piece within the supply chain when it comes to fulfillment and how you can use that to offset some of the uncertainty and also be ahead of the curve on some things that are happening, whether that's tariffs, pandemics, any other unforeseen circumstance that comes up and disrupts the supply chain.
Always something new to disrupt things. So I think there's always something to talk about. In the first part of our conversation, I thought we could just focus maybe on the current landscape and what's changing in China sourcing. So I think the primary thing that everyone has been talking about and has been affected by is the trade landscape has become increasingly complex. And there's just this escalation of tariffs that we're seeing starting within the US, and then kind of the retaliatory tariffs that are coming back from specifically China. And, as of April 10th, the US had imposed 125% reciprocal tariffs, and that's from products that are coming from China as well as Hong Kong and Macau. And so this is in addition to the Section 301 tariffs that were already in place. So we've been seeing our clients be affected by this in varying capacities, right? But this could be up to 145% increase from the initial landed cost that they were paying previously when you take the Section 301 plus the reciprocal. China's implemented their own retaliatory tariffs, raising duties on the US to 125% as well. And I think one of the really big things there was an open question around the de minimis exemption and when that was going to go away. So, low valued shipments under $800 no longer have that loophole of coming in internationally. And that was, the strategy that a lot of large companies like Shein were using, but a lot of also, US based e-commerce brands to help avoid those tariffs. So that's not an option anymore. So I guess, Margarita, what have you been seeing with these tariff increases? How have they been influencing brands and the decisions that they're making?
I've been receiving a lot of calls from a lot of clients a lot of fear has been happening, I'm going to say. But the first thing it is, there's an assessment that it needs to be done. You have to look at it, what is first, what it is, what your product is coming from. And even if it is you're manufacturing from the US, you need to look at your bombs. You need to look at what is your country of origin for all the goods that you are having it. It's not only what are you purchasing in, it is also where everything is coming from. Because even if you're purchasing from the US, you have to see everything what is. And with that, you can also start assessing what are the things that you need to attack now and what are the things that you need to attack later. Not everything can be you need to attack now. And then start looking at what are those countries that are going to start hitting harder. What are those countries that where does China come from? Like China is the first country that is in most increased income right now. What are the things that you can source elsewhere? What are the things that you can look in other countries? What are those countries that you can go and have those lower maybe possibility countries that you can look into it, and what are the other possibilities? Before you start like saying I'm going to start sourcing every elsewhere, you have to assess one by one and start to dissect all your supply chain into it. Look at your bombs, look at all the things that you very detail to start understanding what is going to be your impact and start to understand what is going to happen to you.
Yeah, I think that's can be a bit of a misconception, right? Is like we need, especially if you're buying turnkey, right? You're buying the finished goods, that you think, oh, like I'm manufacturing in this country, therefore I'm safe. But you have to think about kind of upstream, even if you are manufacturing within the U.S., where's your packaging coming from? Where are the components coming from? And so I think that requires a level of transparency. Uh, and kind of like seeing behind the scenes that people maybe didn't want to have that level of detail, but you do need to take more ownership is what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and you need to ask this to your comments. And you don't have this information today. You can go ask her. Ask for your COAs. In your COAs, you should have the country of origin to actually understand where everything is supplies from. So you should start understanding where are your goods are coming from. So you can start understanding the impact of how this is going to affect you and your brand.
Yes, Joe, from a logistics and fulfillment perspective, what challenges have you seen arising due to the heightened tariffs?
Yeah, the challenges are all rooted in the same thing, which is uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, there's volatility, and people make under optimized decisions. So a lot of what we're seeing right now, if we're talking from a finished goods perspective, right, turnkey, it coming in, holding off, right? Canceling orders at origin. Well, what that's doing is it's reducing the amount of volume that's coming inbound. You have empty containers. You have ships that are sailing at less than capacity. You have fulfillment centers that are planning weeks in advance that are now not getting the inbounds they were expecting. So when you're talking transportation and you're talking fulfillment, uncertainty around capacity, which is always going to be the biggest constraint, right? A 40-foot cubic container is a 40-foot cubic container. That's how much there is. A boat can only hold so many. So as you're maxing out or lowering down, that becomes challenging. You are seeing shifts in where volume is coming from or where volume is going to, right? So as people tried to get ahead of the curve and move out of China before tariffs were expanded further, you now have more volume trying to exit markets that don't have lanes that were originally set for that capacity, that are coming into different ports of call for destinations. So there's some different things there that logistics and fulfillment companies are trying to navigate as they plan and look in advance, right? So they're looking 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 4 months down the line in where are we expanding space, how are we getting prepped for peak season, and now their assumptions are changing as less volume is coming in or it's coming in differently. And then the knock on effect for that is the increased uncertainty, which then comes back to a challenge for shippers down the road, which is when will this actually start to hit, right? Q4 isn't going to change. It may not be as big of a peak as normal, but there's still going to be an uplift in what's going on. So if we're pushing out that volume now, when does that volume hit? And are we looking at congestion at port? Are we looking at too much volume coming into facilities that's overwhelming at that period of time? Because now we're shifting where demand and supply live in the timeline that's going on. Um, those are the challenges that providers and partners are thinking about and going through. hey, I thought we'd be at 80% capacity. Our economics are set up to be at 80% capacity. Overnight, we're not getting the next 10 inbounds we anticipated. So what does that look like? How does it look like from my margins? How does it look like from there? And how can I work with the shippers to understand what it looks like down the road? Challenges, no one knows what it looks like right now, right? So that communication is what's going to help with those challenges. But the biggest challenges right now is the shifts in capacity and how we're going to fill them and when they're going to fill and who's going to be left in the dark with containers that are stuck at the port because chassis aren't available, warehouse space isn't available. There's inundation that happens because we've started to shift where that demand is going.
Yeah, and that makes sense, especially with this 90-day period that they just gave. Um, I see a lot of brands trying to push a lot to get a lot of goods right now. So that makes a lot of sense with what you're describing, Joe.
I think I remember, maybe it was you, Marguerite. I can't remember. Someone on the team was saying that one of our clients basically purchased everything for the year within this 90-day period to kind of get ahead of. And you have to think about that, right? Like that could have, storage implications. If your products to have potentially have some type of expiration, that might not be the best method for you. But we've seen a number of clients kind of purchasing in advance to avoid the open question of like, what do tariffs look like in the future?
Yeah, and I think an important thing about that is understanding as the company, right, what you value and what's important to you and what that purchase looks like. Because if you're purchasing for the year, that cash to cash cycle now has gotten extended a lot. And there are people that are going to be able to absorb that and people that are able to do
Yeah.
that. But often, if that's not a fully thought out decision versus a reactionary decision, what doesn't get taken into consideration are the costs in my space, right? So in logistics, in transportation, in fulfillment, you now are occurring costs at different times than you would have. So when you're thinking about cash flow in general and how the business is set up, that's administratively a much different challenge than you potentially had before. But now you're also thinking about, problem, we got it in, we'll store it all. Well, if you're with a fulfillment provider who has surcharges or upcharges for aging inventory because they are trying to, they are a fulfillment center, not a warehouse, right? You're going to start incurring costs that are going to start eating away at your margin that's already being attacked by the tariffs and your COGS going up in those matters. So if you're not taking an all-encompassing approach and analysis towards it, then it's really difficult. And that's hard right now, right? Pressure. You want to move fast, you want to make a decision, you want to alleviate the pain immediately, but you have to be careful and balance that. I made a fast decision that ended up being more painful long term. And that's not going to happen for everyone, but knowing your business and what you value is going to be a key part right now because there are going to be some things that you just can't control. But the decisions you make, you can. Right.
And it's also depend on where the company it is, what its position it is. What is more important? It is the balance, the cash flow, or it is a gross margin. And you have to do a deep dive. This is something that I did recommend to clients to do. It is doing a model. There's ways to do a model about this tariff situation and understand the impacts of what it's doing. This is something that I highly recommended to do. There's ways to do it, and we have done it for multiple clients here internally. Then you can model this out and see what is the impact, and especially doing this uncertainty that we're having, doing the swing changes and how this is happening. There's way to model this out, and so you can understand the impact that is going to be happening for you. How is the cash implication and how is the P&L implication? So you can understand how they will look for you and your brand and what is more important, so you can make the most optimal decisions for you and your brand. So you can actually say, okay, what are going to do? Are going to spend more or are going to hold it? And then you can make a smart decision based on where you are as a company into it.
Yeah, I think so. We were talking about something else this morning, but I remember you said slow is fast. I think you said.
Yes, that is what I said. What I meant to say was slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right? And so
Perfect.
striking that balance, you had it correct. That is what I said to you this morning. It is not what I meant. But what I meant was slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And the reason why that's important is there is pressure to respond and pressure to react, but we're all making decisions right now with very little information, right? Like if I told you to buy a house without looking at it, not knowing what the price was, and not knowing what your mortgage rate was going to be, and just here's the check you need to write me, you would be like, whoa, hold on, I need to ask more questions. But there's a lot of people who are saying, I'm going to be impacted by this. I need to make a change. But operating in a silo and operating super quick is not always the best option, right? Like operating fast is relative. How long would you take to vet out a vendor? How long would you take to vet out a fulfillment provider? How long would you take to make any other business decision, right? Responding within 24 hours of a tariff
Right.
maybe isn't the most ideal thing because we haven't fully understood what's going on. Or as we've seen, in 24 hours, it may change again, right? So being maybe fast isn't the right term, but being deliberate with your decision making and understanding I am making a decision now that's going to impact me for the foreseeable future is important. And I think the biggest takeaway from kind of the questions you've been asking, Jen and Margarita, the answers you've had as well as mine is this is not a decision that can be made by a supply chain director or by an operations professional or by a CFO. It's a full company conversation that needs to happen because everything is very interconnected. Like as stressful as these past few weeks have been for people in the e-commerce space and in the operations and logistics and fulfillment space, like it has shown us the importance that everything is interconnected and there is a knock-on effect from every decision. And there's no right or wrong decision. Every company is going to be different. You just need to be at peace with what the trade-off is that you're making from the decision that's happening. And a lot of that comes with guidance, expertise, being vulnerable and asking questions and say, hey, I've never been through this before. What is your opinion? Where are we at? This is valuable to the finance side of the business. This is valuable to the ops side of the business and finding that trade-off.
I totally agree with you. Because when in the first part that I was recommending to you have to assess, I understand first of where you are and how this is going to affect you is the first step because then you're going to see what are the multiple avenues. One resourcing like where you're going to be is one of them, but even go what is the HCS code that you are doing or your commands are doing, and even educate them. Maybe you're going to be in that realm of like going more to the hand with your commands, start looking and being more like how you're like sourcing this and how you're doing. And there's other routes. Can this be sourced in a different code? Can this be sourced in an overview? And go more with your lawyers. Maybe we're going to a different strategy in this world, in the sourcing world that we're going a different route. Like, are we all sourcing in the right code that we should be? There's some exemptions that there are over here that maybe we need to study them a little bit more. Are we are in the right code? Are we doing it? Like a lot of the times we have been rely on the logistics side and only being them doing they know what they're doing, but maybe the brand needs to own that a little bit more that the state. Maybe you need to be more hands-on and start reviewing, okay, let's see what are we code that we are like exporting this, like importing this, like let's start looking into this and deep dive a little more. And maybe let's be a little bit more like hand to hand with our commands and start reviewing that and start understanding what are the exempt cases that we can start applying into it. So there are multiple avenues. There's no one. There are multiple one and start trying to I'm going to find another place is not the only solution. And not being reactive is my point of view is over here is trying to understand first is where you are so you can start like digging what are the things and first also start strategy like what is the thing that is going to cost me most, start at that first so then you can start attacking the other ones because you won't be able to attack them all of them at the same time probably.
Yeah, that's like kind of the
Make
secret.
an ABC list. You can won't be able to do it all at the same time. So do an ABC list, coordinate with your team, have a project into it, review it, making sure that you have a project into it because there are multiple ways to do it. They can be done. There are multiple ways to do it. I'm pretty sure that there are multiple ways, and we're here to help. You guys need us, but I mean, there are ways to make it a strategy. There's not only one. And as Joe says, there's not all the brands are going to do the same, but there's multiple ways to looking into better options.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess from this first section, I made some notes. I think a lot of it was like around transparency with manufacturing, understanding where your costs are coming from, whether that be from components, from a turnkey perspective. I think really getting into the weeds with the team. I think turnkey is probably out, right? Like you need to understand your supply chain more in depth. Um, we've talked about a lot of strategies already. Maybe we can get into them in a little bit deeper about how brands could reduce their risk proactively. Like what tactics could they take right now? I guess Joe, maybe we'll start with you just from like it doesn't need to be fulfillment. You'll obviously have a very vast background overall, but to take it from whatever lens you want. But yeah, like what exact strategies, maybe from things that you've been working on that the people could take that now.
Yeah, I think before I dive like into specific strategies, one of the things that we're going to see right now, looking back, right? So if we're looking back 5 years, 10 years from now, similar to what we're doing now, back to COVID, is who survived that bump and who is now thriving on the back end of it, and what is it that they did? Um, People who were extremely proactive, right? And used it as an opportunity to open up the hood and say, whoa, we had exposure through this. Let's really double down on making sure that we're back to basics, we're tight where we need to be, and we can weather downturns like this that are unexpected, are now the brands that have come out of this very successful. And that's not even just brands, right? That's software companies, that's anyone, right? In the fulfillment space, you're seeing the same thing. Providers that were good before weathered the storm and are here now, and now they're eating up all the people who showed up when capacity was needed, fed on really easy business, and now it's starting to dry up, right? So being proactive is not a strategy, right? It's a mindset, but being proactive is important, right? Like being able to see around corners, no matter how difficult that may feel, is going to be important. So one of the things that I'm working on right now with some of the clients that we have, and then as well as just people within the industry, is what can we do now to make sure that we get through the uncertainty, but our ultimate goal is to make sure we still exist in 15 years. So how are we doing things now to protect against unknown volume? Is that increasing price? Is that stopping new business acquisition? Is that prioritizing certain things versus other things? Is it saying, hey, we're getting our costs in order because we know we're not going to be able to drive revenue up, so we need to find margin or we need to find cash elsewhere? Um, those type of topics are really important, but the strategy that I'm giving most people is use this as a time to reflect. Everyone is going through the same thing. This is a perfect opportunity for you to say, how can we become more like the people we aspire to be, right? Say what you will about Amazon, say what you will about Walmart, say what you will about Target, about all these companies that have existed for a really long time, exist for a really long time because they have developed a way to not be dependent on loopholes and not be dependent on gaps or gray areas. And that's part of the life cycle. But here's a perfect example where a loophole got closed and people who were, I don't want to say resting on their laurels because that's not fair, but people who were highly dependent and built their business completely around that found that that is not a scalable way to build your business.
Yeah, you
Because
can
if you're going to consider it a loophole,
that's
it's going to get closed at some point, right? So how can we look now at, hey, people we aspire to be like, people who are 20, 30 years ahead of us on the journey, what are they doing that have made this not be as painful for them as it is for us right now? And let's double down on that being our project and our focus going forward. So, like, that's a lot of word vomit there about it, but I think this is a really good opportunity for brands to say that. If I'm dependent on this loophole to import in, how do we start to right size so that we're accounting for that correctly? And then what strategies do we deploy now that are within the bounds? And yes, we have some leading edge things, right? But are within the new rules of the game that are going to help us be successful. Does that mean that we're splitting inventory? Does that mean that we're going multi-node? We used to bring everything to the States and then we would ship into Canada. Okay, well, maybe that doesn't make sense now. Maybe we need to look at, do we have a Canadian node and a US node? Or do we bring everything to Canada, to help defer our taxes and defer our tariff, and we fulfill Canada from there, and then we drip feed into the US. You're not going to get around the tariff, but when we're talking about cash flow, if you bring it, if you would carry, let's use an example, right? I'm going to carry 60 days of inventory on hand in a warehouse. I'm going to have 60 days of inventory on the water at any point in time. And I'm going to have 30 days in production, right? Where it's 150 days worth of inventory that's somewhere in the life cycle. Well, if when you're 60 days out from sale, you drop it in the US, you pay the tariff at that point. But if 60 days from sale, you drop it in Canada, yes, you have another touch, but it's going to sit there, or you send it to a free trade zone or any, we can get into that deeper, right? But if you set it there, once you import to the US, then you have it, right? So there are complications that are there, but there's ways that we can take the same concepts, deferring payment, changing our cash flow, seeing what's going on that are there. But, to the conversation from 15 minutes ago, that adds complexity. So you need people who understand how to drop it into Canada and how to make the movements correctly and how to handle paperwork effectively and manage that piece. If you're going to split your inventory, the theory and textbook tells you that means you're going to need to have more inventory on hand because you can't absorb the risk because your inventory pools are smaller. So if you're going to split and have US inventory and Canadian inventory, or US inventory and European inventory, and they're going to be in different spots, well, yes, you may be able to offset your tariff costs because you've split it out and you've gone to places that aren't seeing tariffs, but you're probably also spending more on your inventory now and your cash flow changes. So understanding all the steps and all the implications is really what's there. I would love to give you a neat bow on the strategy is this, but even if you and I sell the same widget and we go from the same vendor and we are going from the same origin to the same destination, our companies may not be designed and set up economically in the same way. I may be prioritized for volume and you may be prioritized for margin. Our decisions are going to look different, right? Our pain point in the short term is going to be different. So really knowing what you are and who you are and what you value is important. Strategically, there's lots of different things you can do, right? Do you want to go to an FTZ? Do you want to go to a bonded warehouse? That's great, but you also have to find people that can support that. Does that help you from an inbound and an outbound? Do you know how to manage the deferment correctly? Well, now you need different level of capability and internally from a finance and administrative standpoint versus from a warehousing standpoint, right? There's no, I have a pain point here, I'm shifting it here, and there's no pain point anymore. We're just moving the complexity and the challenges around. So knowing what the knock-on effects are is the most important strategy you can have to manage your risk. Right? There's always going to be risk. No one saw a pandemic coming. No one saw, well, maybe some people saw tariffs coming. No one saw tariffs in this way coming, right?
Nope.
Like,
It's not like they talked about them incessantly up until
right. Did we know what it looked like? No, but there's ways that you can control what you can control, right? Am I a sound business? Do I have my basics correct? Do I know what I value? Do we have a true North Star that we're working towards? And then are we making our decisions that are based off of that? And if we find ourselves in trouble, are we raising our hand correctly? Are we working with people like Isba? Are we thinking through all of the changes we can, or are we just knocking the pain down the street to the next problem and playing whack-a-mole? We fix taxes by fixing our cogs. Okay, well, crap. Now we have a problem because there's no capacity for warehousing where we went to. Okay, got that fixed. Now that's great. But now our transportation costs are crazy. So, like, that comes back to the be deliberate, don't be quick.
I totally agree. I think there is opportunities. They might be more complex overall for supply chain and what I oversee in the next couple of years for folks. However, there's opportunities over there. It's just how to do it. But it might be different for every brand, depending on your strategy, depending on where you are, depending on what you're looking into it. Not every one of them want to be the same. It's funny because a lot of people ask us, "Give me the magic one. Just tell me what do you want? What should I be doing?" But it's a little more than that. It's depending on depending on where you are, what you would like to do. I mean, if there's a really general rule of thumb that we say, like, these are the things, like, look into this, review your bonds, review, like, there's different things that we, in general, are telling people to do. But the overall strategy and deep dive about what their supply chain is going to look like, it differs of like a bigger overview of what they would like to do as a brand and what are their task positions, what it is more important for them, and how that will drive. And that is a GDP overview of what they would like to do. I think they're going to be more complex, but I think probably going to be worth it.
Yeah.
I think you guys agree with me.
Yeah, I think like with complexity can come cost, right? But it also comes like with resilience. So you might think, oh, I don't need multiple nodes and warehousing. I don't need to dual source manufacturing, right? Because it's like you're not hitting maybe MOQs, you're not like having that lower purchase or higher purchasing power. But I think in the long run, having like that resiliency and slack, and then building that into your gross margin allows you to make better decisions and react to these things better. That's like one clear thing that we're seeing now is companies that have that already built in. The impact is there, but it's not necessarily as great, right? Because they can have already had these conversations with their manufacturer. They're already planning to move manufacturing to another location, or already were manufacturing in another location. So that's something that I've seen around who is this affecting the most. As Margarita, I wanted to talk to you more about because you've been doing really great work around like the tariff impact modeling and like kind of looking at it line by line. So we don't need to get into too much detail, but I'd love to just kind of talk about that process with you more, and like how you did it, and maybe some of the outcomes that you're seeing from that.
Yeah, cool. So what I have been doing, it is reviewing the bombs, making sure that you have as much as information as you can from your commands, and making sure that you have the country of origin, to making sure that you have all that information into it. You have the average weight, so you can calculate it, what is the percentage of like how this is going to impact for you dollar wise. And so that then you can calculate based on volumes that you're forecasting for this year and the following years, how this going to affect to you and how that will be for you. One thing that I'm recommending is based on your current on-hand inventory, review how this will affect you this year and see what is the purchase that you're planning to do. So review how this is going to do, what you're planning to purchase this year, and based on that, review all the countries to see how this is going to be by country. And you can have a view by country. You can review this by your product. There's multiple views that you can do. And there's an overview what is cash versus what's P&L, because you not always buy what you're actually spending in your P&L. P&L is what you're actually selling, and cash flow is what you're actually purchasing. You always have, you buy more than what you're doing. So understanding that difference is important so you can see the implication into it. You also should be adding your warehousing costs and everything to also see what is your cash overview and all those things out to make sure that you're understanding all those overviews in your cash implications so you can see everything that is affecting you. I recommend to make it this model variable with your values. If your values are changing and everything, making sure that that is the overview over there. Also, the tariff, make it a table over there as a data because they have been changing. So make it sure that you put a date over there or what's the last update of them or when the things have been changing so you can keep an eye on things or what the things have been happening. So that way you can keep track of how the things have been doing. So this is something that has been very effective. So you can have a response, you can have an overview, and as a brand, you can make decision, especially during this transition times that are happening right now, and you can have a better overview about it.
Yeah, I think the reason that's helpful is because things are changing constantly, that it needs to be flexible, right? So it's like you need to see once there's a change, like how does that impact your gross margins and your P&L immediately? And then actually this reminds me, we were talking earlier just a bit about how it's like more of like an integrated process. And I think you were saying it's like around like product development as well, right? It's like so if new products are launching, like what is going into those new products too, and what does that team need to think about? Because like with tariff engineering, it's like maybe a slight change would be a different HTS code, and that could affect things pretty greatly, or maybe like change the country of origin. So I feel like that's an area that's one of the reasons the whole company kind of needs to be bought in and understand the implications of this. I think that they are, just because of the vast amount of news that's being around this. I feel like this is back in like I don't know, 2020 when no one knew what I did for work before that. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, you work in supply chain. Like everyone knows what to do now. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's like we're here again, you know.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're very popular, but yeah.
I think there's something interesting there with that, Jen. Like, you're right. Everyone in a company is probably aware of what's going on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is working in concert for
Yeah.
what's right for the company. So, like, one of the challenges, and this is a question I have back for you, is um, it's my sense is that the pain is felt across the spectrum, but it's felt disproportionately, or it appears to be disproportionately impactful to startups, scale ups, people who are not on that enterprise level because their infrastructure and tends to be less mature. Their tend to be leaner, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of other pressures. Is that a fair assumption from my side? From what I'm seeing it through a different lens than you are with the people I interact with every day. But is that a fair kind of take on what's there?
I mean, I think there's just naturally less resiliency in the smaller the company that you are, just because you don't have the volume to necessarily support it.
Yeah,
Um, and so the larger you get, the more likely that you're going to be having like multiple manufacturing sites or multiple distributions. You have multiple channels even, right? Like this, like the effect of retail versus D2C is quite different because of the ability to change prices. There was a large retailer that I got an email from, and they're basically like, we're not doing any price changes like for the next 90 days, right? So like anything that's coming in, the brand's kind of, if you're supplying them, you're stuck because they're doing their own internal review. Whereas if you had to, I've seen a number of emails come through, been talking to brands, and they're already planning on increasing prices, at least on the line items that maybe are more seasonal, right? So like if there's evergreen product that's already in the warehouse, that cost has been set.
yeah,
But then if it's something that's new coming in and it's already affected by these new tariffs, like they don't want to take a hit on the margin. So they might start testing new pricing already. So you're likely to already see those increases
yeah.
anyways. Whereas with retail, you can't, I think it's like, it varies each one, but it's like it could be 90 days before you can submit a price change.
Right. And the reason why I asked that question when I was listening to you talk there, and some of the things that we talked about previously is like the ability to weather the storm and the ability to say, I am confident and comfortable to wait 90 days to see what happens and do deep analysis
Right.
versus
Yeah, like
I
how much
need to,
cash are you sitting on? Yeah.
right, I need to react immediately is very interesting because one of the things that I think about is we talked about prioritization and what is valuable to you. Like, this is difficult for me to say because I've never been in the arena, right? I've never owned my own brand. I've never been the one who is at the tip of that spear. But I would say outside looking in, there's no shame in saying, yeah, we had these 13 products we were going to launch. We need to figure out how to make the 13 we have right now great. And we need to see if, yes, we have a small presence in this market. Does it really make sense for us to keep that small presence? Or do we put a pause on that market to weather what's going on and then rebuild from a strong base forward, right? That's not going to be as sexy as everyone would like for it to be of growth, 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 growth. But that may be what is the difference between you existing in 2 years from now and not, or you becoming a target for acquisition because you have a very, very sound business now coming out of this versus not coming out of it. So I think when I've used this term a lot, like being deliberate. There's also a piece of like, let's check ego. Big enterprise companies don't often have the ego. They have a lot of other things that allow them to say like, I'm going to sit and wait, and I'm going to figure out what's going on, and I'm going to absorb differently. But part of that for someone who is
Yeah.
scaling or is running a lot leaner is saying, are there things that we're doing right now that are taking focus and priority away from ensuring that the engine we have is running the way it needs to? Because the worst thing would be that your business that you've worked hard to get set up right now is negatively impacted because you're chasing growth at a time of stress and pain by adding in more complexity, right? So to your point, yeah, we're going to launch products for Q4. Well, if we want to re-engineer those tariffs and we want to figure out what's going on and we want to make sure that these really are going to be profitable the way we think, let's not just put our head down and push forward on that. let's make a conscious decision of, are we good with the inventory that's on the pipeline, the products we're already selling, the markets we're already in, and then go from there, right? From the past, we saw that during COVID. I worked on the brand side. We pushed really hard to expand to new markets, tied up a ton of cash, right?
Right.
Because we had split inventory, we just had less focus. Where if we would have focused a lot on, okay, this is what we're doing, this is also impacted, let's make sure we're solid here because this is what we've built our reputation on, then we go forward. There may have been longevity in other brands, or we may not have then in the future, after COVID had settled, ended up pulling out of those markets because we can never get it off the ground to begin with.
Yeah, I was Googling something while you were talking just to confirm this is accurate because it's about the Nintendo Switch, and like I'm not a gamer, so like I don't actually know this, but my husband was saying that like, oh, they like announced the Nintendo Switch pricing, I think the same day that tariffs were announced, I
Yikes.
believe. And he was like, oh, I wonder if it's gonna get like pushed out or things are gonna change. So I wanted to confirm that it did, and it's like it looks like there are. I'm not going to read this whole article because I'm not that interested in the Nintendo Switch, but like there are delays in pricing, the release date, and then I think the exact thing that they said was that they're going to pause that while they assess kind of what the tariff implications are on this particular product are. So I think if Nintendo is having to do that, right,
And
I think
it's
it,
funny
it
because
makes
even
sense.
I have seen the other way. I have seen some brands saying they're not intended to change
Raise,
prices at all,
yeah.
to raise prices. I'm not doing because tariff is doing. And it's because I mean, in my point of view, you cannot say one thing or the other. You need to assess.
I've seen that with some US manufactured product, right? And so where
But
it's
you
like,
still, you don't
yeah,
know where you are sourcing from overseas.
yeah.
That's
I
what
don't
you
know.
need
I
to
haven't looked
assess.
into this particular company's bombs, but they're basically their messaging was along the lines of we invested in US manufacturing last year, therefore we're not going to actually increase prices. We're actually going to decrease prices. And so I think if you have the opportunity to do that and have that kind of messaging, once you've done a review, a thorough review of like where's everything coming from, that could be a really interesting way to just stand out amongst a sea of price increases, and buy some goodwill with customers.
I think there's one thing that I think is super important that we none of all of us have danced around, but we haven't called out explicitly, and I think it falls nicely into how do we de-risk some of what's going on. And I know we wanted to talk about ways to protect margin, but one of that is the importance of information and the importance of data, right? Cash flow was a topic that we have all been talking about that everything kind of goes back to. You need to make a deliberate decision. The deliberate decision is driven by the impact to your cash on hand, how quick you're turning cash, and all of that. But you can only make really sound and good decisions and be deliberate and figure out what's going on with your cash flow if you have strong data to go about that, right? And we were just talking a minute ago, Jen, about, this is probably disproportionately felt by startups, by scaling companies, by companies that are earlier in their life cycle that are still establishing footing or are in a growth trajectory.
Or may not have like the negotiation leverage with their manufacturer.
Right.
Yeah.
But then from a fulfillment perspective, they're often ones that value, because they have to, low cost fulfillment. Well, in fulfillment, you get what you pay for. And so do brands really know what inventory they have on hand? We think we need to make another order and absorb all of these tariffs, but do you really? Are you sure that it's only 100 units in the warehouse? Or do you have hidden inventory? How accurate is your inventory? How much visibility do you have to that? Do you have 5,000 units sitting in returns that are just in the corner collecting dust because you aren't focusing on that? Well, you've already paid duties and tariffs on those. Most of that inventory is going to be able to be potentially can be brought back in and sellable again. Well, don't order more and outlay more cash if you're not certain what you have here, right? That's like an easy is probably not the right way of saying that. That is an immediate thing that you can take that you should be on top of and can be on top of. There's lots of ways to do it. There's functionalities there, but you often see that with more nascent brands or providers who are running, or brands that are running very lean teams, right? There's a lot of things. Inventory can often fall to the wayside because as long as you have enough, no one's asking any questions, right? But there may be a lot of cash that you have already
have
taken the tariff
cases
on.
and months of stock. It's like we're never out of stock, but you have a year's worth of inventory at all times. That's concerning, but yeah.
Right, right. So, but a lot of that is either information is available and not being looked at
Yeah.
effectively, information is available but the right questions aren't being asked, or there's no visibility and we're working off gut feel, right? So I think the data piece is important. Regardless of what we're going to do, you need to know what's happening, right? We talked about it with the modeling, looking at BOMs, looking at the impacts of being able to put that. But also, where have you already laid out cash that's tied up that you're maybe not being effective and efficient with? And more often than not, that's hiding in a dark corner of a warehouse.
Yeah, you need the data and transparency to make the right decisions, right?
Right.
Which is we often see can actually be a lift, right, to get to that point. So if you're not at that point, that's like priority number one.
Right. But then there's also that opens up this mindset too of, well, the paradigm that I'm looking through of how I'm going to weather this storm may be different. Can I make an investment in moving my manufacturing? I could. What's the return I get on that? If I
like
change
right? Like
if I change a software provider and now all of a sudden I'm processing returns faster and I'm getting inventory back into sellable status quicker and I'm investing in a software provider that's helping me with fraud protection and getting parcel spend back. Well, it's like, okay, well, you just put money back into your bottom line and you have inventory that you have already paid on that's not susceptible to these tariffs because it's already in the States or already in whatever country you're sourcing. Or like, are we doing things effectively there, right? There are different ways that you can start to look at it, depending on your sophistication.
It might be a little bit more, but it might be worth it.
Correct. Right? Your dollar may go further in multiple different ways.
Yes, I agree.
I actually think this is an interesting point to like pivot away from sourcing with that dive that you did. But like there's other places to save money, right? I think that's the bottom line is like, yes, like focus on sourcing, become resilient in that area, do the work that's needed to understand that upstream portion of it. But then downstream, there are a lot of costs. And then I think that's like kind of taking that fine tooth comb to the overall operations and supply chain and the interdependencies within the company and seeing where can you get leverage further. So that could be like within fulfillment. It could be better planning so that you're shipping things using a lower cost provider or in a more direct way. It could be finding alternative parcel providers. It could be like getting your chargebacks in line with your retailers and, getting chargebacks from Amazon as well. Like we've seen a lot. So I guess, Margarita, I'm going to pick on you as well to say some ways we could save money. Where would you tell brands to save money?
Well, we say the HTS code is one of them too. Like it could be an opportunity. It is fulfillment. There's always opportunity. Review your rate cards. Review. There's always in fulfillment. There's way to look at it. Review your co-manufacturers. What are the things that you can do with them? Review your contracts. What are the things that they can leverage in your contracts with your co-mans, even if you are here in the US. So,
I think the contracts, that's a really important one because like it's the time to renegotiate, right? There's been a global change and they're used to it. And so I've seen very positive outcomes from renegotiating payment terms. So that's right. If it's about cash, right? It's like, okay, then renegotiate. You're like, I have to outlay all of these duties and taxes when the goods are coming into the US. So I need better payment. I need terms from you. I need 90 days.
Terms.
Yeah. So I think that's probably a pretty quick opportunity if you have the leverage with the factory.
Especially you have developed a relationship through a period of time, is key to do it.
That's why relationships are so key.
But I was just going to say, this is where people who have prioritized relationships and partnerships see it come through, because upstream and downstream people are feeling the impacts of this may be different than you, right? But you're talking about renegotiating contracts, your fulfillment contract, right? It's a good time to renegotiate that. But you also need to be aware that they may come back and say, hey, we can't give you 30-day terms anymore on our side because we can't be floating the cash for you on your parcel or on whatever it may be because we're also not seeing volume now. So understanding what you need, what your partners need, and the importance of both for like everything to happen both upstream and downstream is really good. People who have prioritized that versus being transactional, I think are going to weather this storm a lot easier than everyone else. You probably know that better from a sourcing perspective and from a manufacturing perspective, Margarita and Jen, but it's what I've seen historically, and it's what I'm seeing within the fulfillment space now.
The biggest driver in COGS are fulfillment and the cost of goods sold, which is manufacturing. So in a CPG brand. So those are the two drivers that you need to start looking into it. In general, to see renegotiate your contracts overall is a big driver into it. But as Jen say, there's ways that you to look into it. Deep dive. If you have retailers looking into it, what are the things that you can do to charge back? There's way that you can look into that. That is an avenue that people usually don't look that much closely. Look at it over there. What are things that you can do? Amazon, there's a lot of that too that you can look into. That there's ways to look at it and cock bad and fight it back. So there's way to fight those things out, and there's cash. There's always cash to cut down here and there that you can receive back.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think about from what made us take this pivot, right, is you can invest in squeezing more out of what you do, or you can invest in people and process, which can help with this, right? So you mentioned HTS codes, Margarita. Well, a lot of people are dependent on their freight forwarder and their broker
Yep.
to be the expert, and they're paying a charge on that.
I think bring
But
it in-house. Yeah.
if you're able to and you can find somebody who has that ability and that skill, even if that's at an analyst level versus at a director level, someone who's able to get into the weeds and stay on top of that, that can pay dividends on what is a 60,
Right.
70, $80,000 a year salary versus what you may be paying out. Yeah, it's going to be more expensive than what you're paying on the upcharge, but are you getting better service? Are you staying on top of it? Are you in control of that thing? Well, that becomes a different conversation then, and it is your ROI more impactful. Same thing goes for, shipping and logistics. We talked about it. Is there process? Are there systems where you can find better parcel rates, or you're able to be more knowledgeable there? Well, instead of just outsourcing that, do you have the ability to bring that capability in-house, and is that investment different, right? So if you're investing in your people and your process here, you may be able to unlock some, and that's not going to work for everyone, right? It comes back to what cash do you have on hand, what do you prioritize, and where do you want to go. But there is the ability to rethink what's going on and to handle different parts of your operation differently, and sometimes controlling some of that expertise can help do that, right? Because they're always going to be working in your best interest that time.
So supply chain is going to be more complex depending on the strategy of each brand. So
Yeah.
we're talking about like free trade zones. We're talking in bounded areas. Like it depends on each. Like if you invest in your people or invest in like experts to help you out to figure those things out, it's going to be worth it for your costs. It's going to be worth it probably to go to that overview. It might save you your ROI at the end of the day. Uh, it might be looking, and those is going to be worth it. I think that's overall what what we're saying over here.
Um, in the last few minutes before we kind of open it up to questions, I wanted to talk about maybe selfishly because I'm very interested in like international strategy and expansion. It's one of my favorite topics, so it's not surprising that I picked this. But I wanted to talk about how brands should think about international business, right? And so the assumption is US is your primary market, whether you're already based out of the US or you are a US based brand. You might have some sales internationally, or it could be a big portion of your business. I think this is a really great opportunity to look into that side of your business more and invest in it because, like, one, there's the tariff, right, conversation about it's in everything, but it also safeguards potential downturns in economy, which I hope, hopefully everything's good here. We live in the US, so, but I think, international markets, whether that be Europe, Australia, Asia, like there's a lot of people available to buy products, right? And then so you can have different pricing strategies. So I just want to spend a few minutes kind of talking through how brands could take international expansion more, I guess, more seriously, or what they could be doing to improve that in light of everything.
I think a lot of companies can benefit from the free trade zones areas. I mean, there's an overview leverage those 3PLs and the distribution to like multi-country, and they don't have to be in the US. They don't have to touch. And yes, it requires multi either manufacturing here in the US, they might manufacture overseas too. They have like multi commands that might be an opportunity, could be a thing, or they're already doing it. We have seen clients who actually are doing it. So we have seen both sides actually in happening, but it is a great opportunity. We have seen a lot of brands growing and doing this. It is a huge opportunity, and it makes a lot of sense. It's avoiding duties and taxes, like going here to the US and just going direct to multi-country parts about the country. I don't know, Joe, you want to talk a little more about the fulfillment side? You're a little more expert into those areas about it.
Yeah. I talk a lot about not commoditizing fulfillment, and now I'm going to make a statement that goes across that, right? Like fulfillment doesn't have a language, right? It's storing the boxes, it's moving the boxes. There is a lot more to that, and I will always advocate for that. But when we're thinking about it, really the expansion and the successful expansion and offsetting risk, which I think, Jen, is what you were getting at. How do you diversify beyond it? Is not so much driven by the fulfillment strategy. That ends up being, the grease of what's happening. When you go to multi-node and multi-distribution, you are amplifying your inventory, right? Now that can be a good thing because there are packaging requirements that are different. There are labeling requirements that are different. There are ways that splitting your inventory after manufacturing or during manufacturing and shipping to end markets can actually be cheaper because you're not adding extra touches to relabel boxes, to repackage, to rekit, whatever that may be. That's something that seems like it would be a big undertaking. But it's important to realize the challenges that can happen everywhere, right? HTS codes are universal, but tariffs are different. So as you go to different markets, you have more complexity that's going on. Your margin now is not margin of product A, it's margin of product A in market A, right? Or in market one, and margin of product B in market two. And so now you start to see some different things. There's some more complexity. You may have 4 SKUs, but if you go into a country like the EU where they have, or a country within the EU where they have different labeling, you now have 8 SKUs for products, but you have 8 SKUs because the inventory can't be pooled. Or you can figure out a way to design your inventory to be or your boxes to be universal, right? Grocers that are international like Lidl and like Aldi who have some of that they're great at that. They have universal packaging. Does it stink for the US because you have a whole bunch of stuff in the back that doesn't make any sense? Yes. But does it allow them to be super flexible with what they're doing? Absolutely. Right. So there's some things that you need to think about just deeper. What are the different requirements? When you're manufacturing and you're sending into the EU, they use different pallets. They use different pallet sizes. They use different pallet types. Warehouses are set up differently. So the space you need in the US is not the same space you need in the EU. The pallets are smaller, right? When you're talking about the packaging, that's an important piece. So again, it comes back to being fully understanding of how does it work? How does parcel work there? It's not a copy paste of what's going on. Requirements are different, packaging is different. It can be an absolute unlock,
You lived
but it
in
also can be an anchor that sinks you.
right, Joe? You
Oh,
lived in Germany for a brief period of time.
it did, yes.
Yeah. So
And then came and worked for a company here that bought companies that operated worldwide in the e-commerce space. And I may be speaking from experience when you can't use the same packaging everywhere. And all of a sudden you have a cash outlay and you're like, well, that product I'm just paying storage costs on because it's marked wrong. And we thought we asked all the questions and we didn't. We moved quick. We didn't move deliberate. Right. So,
I, I think
um,
I think yeah, we all have lived and worked internationally, and I think can speak from experience that it's like not exactly the same as it is in the US, but
Right.
it's not necessarily, it shouldn't be approached as scary either, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity if it's done in a thoughtful way.
Right. I think the biggest thing is in 2025, you don't have to go it alone on
Yeah.
any part of your business or your process. Someone is going to have done it. Someone is going to be able to give you some feedback. Now it's on the recipient to say, am I blindly taking this, or am I gathering information and forming my own decision when that's best for my business? It should be the latter. Diversifying into other countries is phenomenal. It's going to become more impactful as we see the tariffs change the way that they are right now. It's going to help de-risk certain things, but only if it's done in a thoughtful and deliberate manner where we're moving to the right countries at the right time with the right products and the right understanding, right? Rushing those just to say I'm diversified is going to probably end up shooting yourself in the foot relative to I was slower to market, but I came there in a much more thoughtful way. And I was able to then have a hockey stick growth once I got there,
Yeah.
right? That's ultimately what you want to do. You want to pair your trade-offs effectively. You want to pair your costs and your ROI effectively, and that's different for everyone.
Okay, so this is a continuation of our conversation earlier this week. We didn't have time to get to some questions, so we're just going to answer a few of the questions that came through in some detail. So I think the first one I saw that was really interesting. So we're starting to sell in Canada and Europe. How do we decide where to place inventory to reduce duties and shipping time? So I think this is really relevant now because you can have a strategy that we discussed around shipping directly to the country that you're selling in versus bringing it into the US. I don't know, Joe or Margarita, if you had a opinion or some expert advice to share there.
A continuation of my answers from the live event is it really depends on what you value and making the right decision based off the trade-offs you're taking into account. So as you look to split inventory between countries, that means that you will need to have more inventory by and large to make sure that you have the right buffers covering for lead times, so on and so forth. Um, that cost can be offset by taking advantage of potential different tariffs, different cost of duties by going from origin into Canada instead of to the US, origin into the EU. But it's really just a matter of being deliberate, like we talked about. So there are brands that we are working with and talking to where we're doing this right now with them, helping them find fulfillment in Canada to already separate it out. This was already on the roadmap for them, right? This has just accelerated it, what's been happening in the last couple of weeks. And then we've talked with other brands about it as well, where the density of orders really doesn't make sense for that to happen for them yet. The advantages of splitting that inventory, the trade-off it really isn't there, and that tipping point's going to look different for everyone. So again, it's really just being deliberate, move quickly, but don't move too fast.
I will say that it depends on the country of origin of the product, right? It
Yeah.
depends on that too. Like if you have a product that comes from China as a perspective, like yes, it makes sense probably not to come back to the US. This is one of the main things that yeah. And again, it values. Is your value cash? Is your value propositioning into it, depending on different things that you can do. But then there are other options. And Jen, I know you have done a lot of work with other clients to diversify a little bit more. And maybe you can speak a little more because you're more an expert in this field. But there are other ways to do it
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time on international strategy in general. And yeah, I think, yeah, one is like country of origin, right? So what is the actual duty impact that's happening now? There's also kind of the, not necessarily what's happening now, but how do you protect against future risk, right? Because we don't know exactly what tomorrow is going to hold. So having an alternative location can be helpful in that sense. But there's a lot of options, right? So like you can either fulfill directly, you don't need to set up in-country fulfillment in the place that you're shipping to, right? Like it doesn't have to be Canada. It could be Hong Kong. It could be Singapore. It could be in China or in Vietnam to get closer to the manufacturer. Uh, you know, we've been talking to a company called Portless a lot that handles that, and they're expanding into different locations, and they've been a good partner to work with. And then on the passport side, they've acquired brand access. And so there's the in-country fulfillment that you could do if you want in-country to Europe, and they'll handle kind of like that importer of record, taxes and all of those obligations. So there's definitely some compliance things that you'll need to think about depending on which country you choose. And then there's also companies that specialize in that so that you don't necessarily need to expand your team to take on this additional fulfillment complexity. But back to Joe's point around where are you holding your inventory, and maybe it's only your top selling SKUs, right, that you're holding in that particular country, or your fastest movers. So there's a lot to take into account. You don't want to do it lightly, because you could end up with inventory that's just stuck there. The other side of it is from a compliance perspective, like making sure your labeling's correct. There could be some specific requirements around like language, or if it's electronics adapters, or recycling electronics and packaging. So depending on the product category, there's a lot that goes into it. But this is one of the areas that I find very interesting.
Yeah, Jen, I think you made a good point too, where people have gone away from the dropship model into the US, but that doesn't mean that it can't still be beneficial into other origin or other destinations as well. And so for supply, or for brands who are shipping maybe in lower volumes and it doesn't make sense to drop inventory there, that option, like you talked about with some of the partners that you mentioned, is absolutely something that it can be front of mind and applied differently than it has been historically, but in an effective way.
Yeah, and drop shipping still could make sense into the US,
Yeah.
just not particularly from China.
Correct.
Yeah. So yeah, if your manufacturers in India or Vietnam, that could still make a lot of sense, or from Europe directly. The next question that came through that I think is interesting, right? Because everyone's starting to really focus on costs here. So we've been with the same 3PL for 4 years. How do we know if we're overpaying or if we have leverage to renegotiate?
It's a loaded question. It depends on the relationship that you have with that vendor. Now, I would say best practice, in my opinion, would be to go back to the market every 2 or 3 years, and have a pricing exercise. Even if you're satisfied and happy with what's going on with that provider, providers who are well established and who feel as though you have also done business with them in good faith are going to be open and understanding to that. It's very common practice at an enterprise level company to do that. When the contract is up, it's your contract to lose, but we are going to go back to the market and renegotiate and make sure everything is fine, right? And sometimes that looks like, hey, it's a one-to-one conversation. We just want to go through the pricing activity again. And sometimes it is opening it up fully. So I think the starting point for that is I would not feel any type of negativity or any type of way as a brand going to someone and saying, hey, it's been together for 4 years. We're happy with what's going on. Would like to go back and then go through the pricing exercise. Your business has changed. Our business has changed. Economics have changed, right? And if I was a provider, I would also be open to that as well. I think the one main thing I would say is be open and transparent with them. Hey, we're happy with what's going on. If you're happy with what's going on, we're happy with what's happening. We do want to make sure we're going back and we're being competitive. We're helping you out. You're helping us out, and we're going to go through it. They're going to be surprised if they hear that you're doing it from the market versus you telling them, and that's what I would look to avoid. Now, what does the pricing look like, and how do you know if it's good or bad? Again, that's going to come back to the business. So what you can do is make sure that you have a representation of a few different people coming back and giving you pricing. Most providers are going to have the same overhead that they're trying to cover. So your total all-in cost, if you're looking at providers in a similar geography, should be relatively close to each other. The thing to really look out for is, are there outliers high and low from the grouping that you're looking at? And then we have tools and consultants, and there's tons of resources both within the ISBA group and in the broader supply chain ecosystem that do this for a living, can help with this. I think we mentioned it on the live. You don't have to go about it alone. There are a lot of people that can help walk you through it, answer questions you have. There's tools like Slotted that can help bring that RFP process much more streamlined, so that you're getting a good sense of where are you landing within the market, and then back to the same thing, making sure you're making the best decision based on the trade.
Yeah, I often find that people are surprised that it is easier to have the conversation, right, and be transparent with them and approach things from a partnership perspective. I think people try to avoid, having difficult conversations, but at the end of the day, maybe because we've just been doing this for so long, I'm used to having these conversations that it's very matter of fact. It's like, this is just what companies do. It's best practice. It's healthy.
Yeah.
It's nothing personal. If anything, it's a positive, right?
Right,
Because
exactly. Yeah, and
we
I
know
think
what.
one of the things that's difficult is it always feels like it's going to be a hard conversation, because when
Yeah.
we talk pricing, it's everybody gets on the defensive right away because somebody's going to try to get me, right? Businesses that are established, businesses that are operating very well right now, are businesses that don't approach the conversations like that, and the emotion is taken away, and they work with partners who are similar, right? Everyone is looking to get a benefit. Not everyone is looking to get an edge. And I think there's a difference in that. And so there are ways that you can find mutual benefit to both sides and it be a positive outcome from that negotiation. Now, the bigger struggle is what I see with smaller brands that are startups, brands that are running very lean, is that they aren't used to going to the market for a pricing activity, right? They're used to just saying, hey, give me your price
Yeah.
with one provider, or tell me what your pricing is. And so there's a level of experience and sophistication that just hasn't happened yet because the experience hasn't. That's not good or bad. It's just where they are. And so again, rely on people around you. Rely on talking with brands that you aspire to be that are 5 years further in the journey, 3 years further in the journey. How are they going about it? Talk to Jen and Margarita, right? Come check out Slot. These are things that can help demystify some of that, and help you get better pricing because you can be much more thoughtful about it. I think a good anecdote is over the past 4 weeks, we've had a handful of RFPs go through Slotted. 3 of them, the incumbent was invited, the incumbent priced, the incumbents kept the business. And not all of them was the incumbent the lowest per unit cost, but the trade-off of it is close enough, I know what I have, and I will not incur costs from moving providers. They're in the ballpark and I'm good with that. We're happy, we're going to stay, right? We've had the flip side where people were moving away from a provider. They brought in that information to just be able to see and benchmark against what it used to be, and found that the provider they were moving away from actually was probably the most advantageous from a cost perspective. But there were other aspects to it that they knew were not okay. And so the lowest price wasn't worth the value to them. And that's why they went to the market. Out of all those scenarios, everyone went to the market, saw pricing, was able to make a good decision. Not everyone took the lowest price. Most people took what they value. I'm getting better service, and that's worth the additional money. I know what I'm getting, so that's worth the additional extra cents per unit. They're not that crazy outside of what the market appears to be for my business. And I think that's important to understand.
Um, I think that's a whole separate conversation that we could
Oh
have
yeah,
around like hidden costs of moving and costs of staying, and yeah, so we'll save that for another
that'll be good.
another
Let's make
days.
that a
But I think
different episode, because
yeah, yeah,
I think, I don't know if we launched it or not yet, but we just did a blog about that topic specifically for our
yeah,
slotted
nice.
now. So
Okay, so this next question is any examples of simple BOM changes that had a big impact on margin? I think Margarita, I'm gonna lean on you for this one. I know some things that come top of mind are like packaging. I think it's amazing how many people overspend on packaging.
Yeah,
But
there's some people that are give an example. If you have packaging there, you're looking. I'm going to pick up China because it's of course a higher right now topic and margin into it of tariff right now, and you can find it elsewhere. There's multiple options to find package elsewhere into it. So if you can do the small change, it is a huge impact in your bond, and that's as simple as it can be of that. If you're buying raw materials and you can change it, there's changes that you can find into it. Some gets more complicated, others are some are less simple, but I think those are like the simplest ones that you can start looking around. of what are the things that changes that it can be impactful, but it's simple changes that it can be helpful.
Yeah, I think those little things make a difference. I remember, I think I was saying this to you. I like received someone's a product from a brand, and like the packaging was so large for like this free. I was like, this little box must have cost like $3, and they're not getting revenue from this. This is like a free gift, and so when I feel like as a being in this industry, but then being a consumer as well, you notice like all the inefficiencies that come through. Like you're like, why did you do it this way? Why did you use this pump? So I'm very critical of everything I receive.
Always.
Yeah, you're like I should reach out to them. Um,
So one of the questions that we've been seeing and or I've been getting is this is meant to pull manufacturing back to the US. That was one of the benefits of the tariff. As we're talking with brands who are looking at changing factories, changing manufacturing sources, are we seeing them diversifying into different countries within Asia, different countries across the world, or is it actually having some of the effect that we thought, which was bringing manufacturing back to the States? What are we starting to see as you guys look at supply chains for different companies and through Sourcify and so on and so forth?
For the first route that most people takes is like trying to look at into manufacturing in the US and where things they're looking. But I have other brands that they are actually manufacturing in the US and they're looping into all the raw material that they have. And they have like realized that they have like raw materials that they're basically only source are like in Asia, in China. And they have this problem where there's not that many possibilities for them to start sourcing these raw materials elsewhere. So they're even looking to possibilities to start like probably manufacture this product in another country, which they're currently today manufacturing in the US, and they're start looking to manufacture elsewhere because the tariff is much higher by bringing this raw material here to the US today, and the impact might be lower taken to a low tariff country today, manufactured over there, and it will come a finished good. We come here to the US with a lower tariff impact into it, and it's a different overview and impact less to this brand. So it's actually is coming out instead of coming in for this particular brand. It would apply for all their goods. They don't want to do this for all the goods because of course this complicated their supply chain is not they're not taking this as lightly. They love to do things here in the US, but they're looking to what they can do to less impacts their dollars into their P&L.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It just shows how complex all of this is and can be, right? Unintended consequence. Yes, there's probably a very small portion of things, but these tariffs in some industries and some areas of business are going to actually have the unintended consequence of things moving out of the states to be able for it to be more advantageous. I think that's a really interesting one that I don't really think about because I'm not as deep in the manufacturing space as you are. But if the raw material is single origin source and you can only get it from where tariffs are super high, it's expensive now to manufacture it here in the states. So look to move it elsewhere. Very interesting.
yeah, I think there's going to have to be some type of concessions or something to incentivize and to take the components into it because from a business perspective, like that makes complete sense to move it manufacturing to a country that has the lower tariffs and then also to a closer place to where the raw materials are coming from. Um, so yeah, we'll see how this all plays out. I think like there's been some pretty standard things as well as you'd expect, like people that were manufacturing in China and then they're looking to nearby countries. But to that point, like there's certain fabrics and things like that that are it's more cost effective, or they just have the technology to manufacture it in China. So it's still going to be coming from there, even though it's being assembled in another country.
Yeah, as you say, I think it's important to say like a lot of our audience works with finished goods, but a good portion of people are working with the raw materials, and so the impact is different, right? Like moving where you're getting the tariff engineering, I guess, is ultimately what that is a great example of what you talked about, Margarita. But getting a raw material, moving the manufacturing out of China to somewhere else is great if that product is going through a full transformation and then the country of origin has switched, right? That's the ultimate piece to keep in mind because the tariff is attached to that country of origin. So raw materials manufacturing,
different type of strategy and different type of viewpoint that you can take and approach you can take versus taking a finished good just from origin to destination. So
Well, somehow the hour is gone. So hope everyone liked it. If anyone has feedback, we would love feedback on other topics that you would like us to talk about or things you would have liked to hear more on. But if you need us, you can find us I'm at Jennifer@isba.co, Margarita's Margarita@isba.co, Joe is Joe@slotted.com.
Right.
Isba.co, slotted.com. So yeah, we're excited to keep doing this, and we'll see you and talk to you soon.